Who am I kidding? One of O'Driscoll's boys couldn't open his mouth, but he'd tell a lie. Screw it. Let's just have some fun. Geld him.
Yeah! What's he doing? Where's he going?
Oh, don't worry. You're only balls, boy. Just gonna cause you trouble. You know, in Imperial Rome, eunuchs was among the happiest and most loyal of courtiers.
No, you kidding me, right?
Of course.
You sick bastard! Oh, what do you want from me?
Very few characters have found themselves in such a disheartening position as Kieran Duffy, a man whose very origins of falling in with Linde Gang sealed his position as someone who couldn't be trusted, someone who was weak, a fool, and a Driscoll. No matter how hard he tried, taking care of chores around the camp and tending to the horses, no matter whose life he decided to save or how badly he stuck his own neck out on the line for the rest of the gang, no matter how badly Kieran tried to reason with all those around him, he still was not one of them. In some way, it's hard to think if he would ever be considered anything other than what he was continually referred to as, an O'Driscoll. I think for him to really be accepted by all, and I mean accepted in a way where he's respected and not referred to as anything other than his own name, or maybe even talked to in a manner that is similar to how Bill is, where Bill is still a member, just his effectiveness is questionable in some areas.
How come every time I get in trouble, I'm called a fool and an idiot? But when you get in trouble, oh, it's just one of them things.
But Kieran is kind. He's soft-spoken and quite nervous. In order for him to adequately escape the Driscoll moniker, he would have to prove himself to be of far more use than just tending around to the camp. And maybe that price would mean actually bringing in Colm straight to Dutch or continuing to provide more and more valuable information on the gang he previously rode with, allowing the Linde Gang the pleasure of, if not immediately taking care of Colm himself, then continuously ripping off score after score, getting under Colm's skin and even systematically destabilizing the O'Driscoll's power and influence in the local area. But unfortunately, that's not the case at all. Neither way, personally speaking, if it wasn't for Arthur getting sick and Arthur's own mentality and perspective starting to change because of his sickness and him having to come to terms with his own mortality, I don't think Kieran would have ever properly been accepted in at least Arthur's eyes. I think it would only be through Dutch's direct blessing that would influence Arthur to lower his guard and give Kieran a fair shot. And even then, I think Kieran would have the same amount of trust as Micah, as far as Arthur's concerned. But of course, that is if Dutch would ever give that blessing himself. Who really knows? Dutch's own position towards Kieran, I found to always be a little interesting as well. I mean, if we take a step back and look at Kieran's position, he would be the ideal recruit for Dutch after all. A lost, vulnerable soul that technically is at the mercy of his rival. I mean, the first time we see him, he's being smacked left and right by Colm. Understandably, when Kieran is captured, he is a little squeamish and all too eager to denounce the O'Driscolls that he's riding with, but ultimately after time has passed, I think even by looking at him, you can tell how useful he is. There's no point in continuing to have that level of hate or disdain towards Kieran. He's not that much of an effective gunman, and it's pretty clear that he's not even a highly trusted member within the O'Driscoll camp. So as far as information comes, he would obviously keep hitting a brick wall similar to what he does within the game. It would be up to him to take up arms and try to be a much more aggressive gunman, although taking a deep look at his personality, or not even a deep look, just looking at how he speaks and how he interacts around those he comes into contact with, it's simply not within his character. But I want to go back to Dutch real quick. Time and again as the story goes on, Dutch displays the ability to at least play the gracious host and feign submission.
We are simple country folk. All we have is each other.
You had nothing to do with destroying the liquor business!
We was innocent bystanders. And that which we weren't innocent of, well, we most surely were ignorant of.
That was a route he could have definitely taken with Kieran. Colm had to inform the men who chose to ride with him about this rival gang that they would undoubtedly continue to keep clashing with, and with the explanation of who this gang was, has to come some information on the gang's leader. Dutch portrays Colm and his men in the worst light imaginable. Realistically speaking, Colm must be doing the same, so by feigning hospitality and appreciation, Dutch could have very well caught Kieran by surprise. With this notable contrast in character from what Colm told him and the rest of the O'Driscolls who and what Dutch was, the 180 may have lowered Kieran's own guard in a very different way, with Dutch approaching as a benevolent leader, a surrogate father, if you will. We obviously don't know this until much later after spending more time with Kieran, but I think it would be a fair argument to raise that if Dutch decided to do so, that of course would have ran the risk of Kieran running back to the O'Driscolls and betraying the Linde Gang by basically telling Colm where the gang was hiding out at. You know, the gang that basically just cleared out their entire camp of their explosives, of their map, and of all their men. But either way, we know Dutch doesn't do any of this. Instead, he resorts to threatening and even being all too willing to torture Kieran simply by his affiliation with his hated rival. How Dutch decides to treat Kieran, I think, can just be seen as an extension of Dutch's own hate and unwillingness to see anything shy of Colm's suffering. A suffering Dutch was all too willing to let run wild on Kieran in the meantime. In the grand scheme of things, while Kieran is only in a handful of missions, it's hard to really believe how much he could contribute to the gang, given his own personal, quiet, nervous demeanor, tending to the horses, and quietly doing his part to ensure the gang's survival seemed like it was something he was much more comfortable with than going out and securing big scores. Hell, even Lenny appeared much more aggressive and hardened than he did. But despite this, I do think, because of Kieran's own demeanor and not really appearing in all that many missions, Rockstar gives the intentional impact he's left to have. It's a life troubled and plagued by loneliness, by punishment, by never being accepted. Maybe it was because of this fear of being left alone and dying by himself that ultimately drives him. Kieran said himself, he wasn't given a choice to even ride with the O'Driscolls. He was given the offer to ride with them or die. And while he chose with the former, refusing to kill or plunder as the rest of them did, may have found him in a position where he was the bottom of the barrel, weak, spineless, only interested in looking after the horses. This refusal to bring in cash or actively spread the influence of the O'Driscolls, or even properly stand up for himself. This meant similarly he was in a position in the O'Driscoll gang as he was with the Vanderlyn gang, which he openly says to Arthur, Bill, and John on their way to 6 Point Cabin, albeit he says this revelation in a manner that is meant more to try to get the three of them to understand a common ground between both of the gangs rather than depict himself as an abused victim, something even John took an offense to.
You know, you all ain't that different from the O'Driscolls.
What did you just say?
I've been watching you all these weeks, and,
You've been tied to a tree. You don't know nothing about this gang.
yeah, well, I'd say you don't know much about the O'Driscolls. But maybe I know more about you than you know about them. And I know all about them, so...
It's an attempt to make them realize he's human too, while attempting to alleviate the mutual hatred. A hatred that he possibly understood the Vanderlyn gang may be the more logical out of the two. But regardless of intent, Kieran's position in the gangs he finds himself in and the grand events of Red Dead Redemption 2's story as a whole is one he possibly never would have gotten out of. A position he depressingly shares with Arthur on their fishing trip. After Kieran made the decision to bring Dutch's men to Colm's doorstep at 6 Point Cabin, whether if he wanted to pick sides or not, this action inevitably sealed his fate with the Vanderlyn gang. He cannot leave the comfort of the campgrounds without some type of escort, some type of protection from Colm's men that are roaming the heartlands.
See? Look at this. Life ain't so bad. At least you ain't tied to a tree.
I'm still a prisoner, Arthur. I can't step outside camp by myself for a second without being terrified of one of Combs' boys gonna come pick me up. When I'm in camp, I got Bill and Sadie whispering in my ear all the time how they're gonna kill me in my sleep. Like living in a nightmare.
And within this protection from Colm's men, he cannot find peace from his protectors, since he constantly has Sadie and Bill in his ears, all too eager to share with him what they'll do to him in his sleep, or Dutch constantly reminding him that he can't trust this previous traitor. It's torture. The optional fishing mission with him during the chapter of Clement's Point is one I recommend giving a shot because it provides a lot of insight for Kieran, with him acknowledging his own unique circumstances and Arthur even refusing to find any sympathy for this man who he says he may have ended up killing at 6 Point Cabin, or any other future run-in with Colm's men had events been different. Honestly, in the end, Kieran's loyalty from one gang to the other will be doubtful, with him revealing 6 Point Cabin to Dutch under threat of torture and him revealing Shady Belle to Colm under the same circumstance, although I suppose everyone has a breaking point. However, given his willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder with other Vanderlyn members when Milton and Ross visited the camp, something even Micah isn't seen doing, you have to at least give him credit for trying to earn his place when the gang needed him most, especially if it meant putting his life on the line, which he did, being butchered and humiliated in the worst way imaginable. And it's kind of sad to say for me, but my first playthrough, technically my first two, I didn't even realize who Kieran was when he died. I had a oh damn moment, but I just didn't remember what person that was. And hearing how all the Vanderlyn members talk of Kieran after he passes, it's unfortunate to say, but maybe that's what he was really meant to be known for. Not the person he was, not what he did, not how hard he tried or how pure his heart was, but the manner in which he died, which is kind of sad when you think about it.